Dr. Versalati here, and in this screencast we're going to talk about tense aspect combinations in English. And to do that we're going to use the handout called Tense and Aspect Combinations. The objectives is to identify the pattern of each combination of tense aspect modality in English, construct your own sentence that demonstrates the use of this verb form, and recognize some underlying meanings from the related forms and the patterns. And ultimately, the goal is for you to understand the use of tense aspect modality in combination in English as demonstrated on the graded assignment. So the directions is to, after reading the use and looking at the example, create your own example and summarize. So let's look at the first one. The first one is the use of the present perfect progressive. So it's present tense and it has both perfect aspect and progressive aspect. And there's only one use, and it's when we want to emphasize an activity from the past, often implying a continuation. I gave a couple examples here, such as I have been visiting my neighbor on Saturdays. It's an activity that has it from the past, but it sounds like it's continuing. It can also be, this example might be useful, I have been teaching for 25 years. It's an activity from the past, but it implies that you're going to continue. That's the main time we use present perfect progressive. Let's look at the main use of past perfect progressive. Conveying a past ongoing situation that's connected to some other past situation. So I might say, I had been jogging before football season started, or something like that. So this construction, had been jogging, is in past tense, but it also has the perfect and the progressive aspect. It conveys an ongoing situation. It sounds like from this example that I was jogging regularly, but it stopped sometime because of a past situation. And you can see that past situation because the second clause, the subordinate clause, is in simple past. So what's the form of these complex tenses? And what kind of underlying theme or feeling do you get from these? So what's the form? Both of the present perfect progressive and the past perfect progressive is going to have some form of the verb have. For the present, it will be has or have. For the past, it will be had. And then it will have a second auxiliary be, been, and we need that because the be auxiliary for the progressive in the en to finish the past, to finish the perfect aspect, regardless of present or past. And then it'll be the verb and the ing that's needed for the progressive aspect. So we have been verbing, and the tense, either present or past, will be on the first auxiliary. What's the underlying theme? What do you see here? Well, both of them express an activity that seemed to be ongoing in the past, and in the present perfect progressive it implies continuation, but in the past perfect progressive that extended situation is no longer happening. Now let's look at the future. Let's look at the future progressive. Again, future is in scare quotes because when we describe tense as a marking on the verb, we know that what grammar books call future tense isn't linguistically tense because it's not a marking on the verb. In English, we mark this concept with an auxiliary a modal. So we use the future progressive to convey a future situation that is expected to be ongoing. For instance, I might say, I will be walking next semester to work, or every Friday or something. So it's a future situation that I expect to do ongoing. We can also use the future progressive for a future event with a greater possibility of change. So I might say we will be visiting Glacier National Park, and that again is a future intention, but it has a little more likelihood that I might not get there. So if you compare we will visit, it's an intention, a future intention, but if I say we will be visiting, it kind of feels a little less certain of an intention. It's still a little bit less likely, even though when we say we will visit, there is some element of uncertainty there as well. So what is the form of this future progressive? Take a moment to write that down. So the form of the future progressive is a modal. In these examples I used will, but it could be any of the modals: will, must, should, could, and then it'll be the be auxiliary that we need for the progressive aspect, then the verb and the ing that we also need to represent the progressive aspect. Moving on to the future perfect, there are two uses that I've identified in this handout. We use the future perfect to express an event or an activity that is complete prior to some other time in the future. For instance, Megan will have decided on a major by the end of this semester. So the end of the semester is still in the future, but we're saying that the deciding on a major is going to be complete by that time in the future. There's another use called future in the past, where a particular event was still in the future, but by the time I'm telling you about it, it's now that event is in the past. Often it's unrealized or canceled. For instance, I would have told him, but he didn't give me a chance. So it was something that I had planned to do, that intention of the future, but it's perfect in that it's completed and unrealized. So that's a little bit more complicated. What do you notice about this form of this future tense? Write that down. So in this tense, the future perfect, we see that it will start with a modal: will, would, should, may, then the have, and the verb with the perfect ending, the ed or the en, depending on, or an irregular form. So we have the have and the ed, en required of the perfect, but also the modal that's required to have the label future. Looking at the future perfect progressive, what are we going to expect by that form? Well, if it's future, we're going to need a modal, right? So we're going to need a modal for the form, and we're going to need both the have of the perfect and the be of the progressive and the en of the perfect, plus the verb and the ing needed for the progressive. So when would we ever use future perfect progressive? There's a lot going on there. Well, the use is also describing a situation that is particular. It's in a situation that's expected to continue until a specified point in the future, for the future label, usually with an adverbial expression. So I might say, by the time she graduates, she will have been studying for 5 years. So it's not, she hasn't yet reached that 5-year mark in her study event, that time, but sometime in the future she will have hit that 5 years of studying mark. Another example, you will have been waiting for 2 hours. when the plane arrives. So you haven't been waiting that long thus far, but by the time the plane arrives in the future, you will have been waiting. So what do you see as an underlying theme here? Well, it's describing some sort of extended situation, like the studying or the waiting, that sometime in the future will have been completed. But it certainly emphasizes the ongoingness of the event until it ends sometime in the future. Now, the grammar book, which is the title of the book, talks about tense aspect modality in a way that might be helpful. And the way they do that is they talk about the use of the tense aspect system by contrasting different combinations. For instance, the simple present versus the present progressive. And you can see there's lots of different examples under each one. So this text might help you understand and explain that to learners. And it goes through lots of different of the combinations that sometimes get confused. I encourage you to look at that. Some of my explanations and examples came from this source, and at the end of this reading there's some other ideas and teaching suggestions. This might help you explain it to others, those fine subtleties about when we would use one of the tense aspect modalities versus another.